This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and graphic design. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, we recap Art and Design Fair Collect. We also look at rug-making traditions in India, plus we learn more about the 19th century designer Christopher Dresser. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Hello and welcome to today's program. We start today in the studio where I'm joined by Maylee Evans, this show's producer. We're covering another fair, Maylee. we are staying in London this time for a roundup of Collect, which took place at Somerset House last week. You went along. Tell us a little bit about it.
We're working on this programme for a few years now. One of the joys is being able to return to fairs, seeing, I guess, the gallerists time and time again, getting a sense of what's new and exciting, and Collect was no exception. So it's a 21st edition, and as you said, it's sort of a meeting point for international contemporary craft and for the very best in making.
I mean, I feel like when we talk about craft, so often we're either talking about the way things are made, or for some reason I jump ahead to crafternoons that I used to have with my mum, which is where we're making things at home. Where does this kind of land on that spectrum?
It is really the pinnacle of making. It's an international fair, and I think with craft, maybe one thing to note is that a lot of these makers are working by themselves in isolation. And so I suppose you might have a community of makers in your city, but there's very few sort of times in the calendar that you are really seeing work from across the world. One of the speakers you'll hear from later, she's continued to showcase her gallery's work for the last couple of years, simply because the collectors that you're in front of they are that top tier, which is why it's continued for so long and why it continues to be the real source of inspiration for makers and collectors too. Often craft is seen as something kind of historical and it's looking backwards, but actually you look at some of the pieces on show there and you just go, I have never seen anything like this, which is really exciting for myself, seeing lots of fairs across the world. But I think for collectors, this is cool. I want to support this and see more of where this could go in future.
Tell us a little bit about what you saw there. We've kind of got the broad overview of I guess, the event. But are we talking things that are maybe more art-leaning, a little bit more sculptural, or is there an element of practicality to it? Are we seeing tables and chairs and the like?
They vary widely. You've got those sort of pieces that lean more towards that more art side, maybe more sculptural pieces that are there to be enjoyed sort of aesthetically as an addition to the home, to maybe jewellery pieces which are very versatile and they want to be used and to be out in the open and sort of looked at in admiration. So you've got the full gamut, but I would say it's steering more towards collectible, one-off pieces that you are not going to see anywhere else.
And then I guess in terms of who was on show, were there any standouts for you or any people or craftspeople whose work you really, really admired or enjoyed looking at?
Yes, so one new addition this year was Anne's Gallery. So they're based up in Edinburgh, Scotland. And I went in and just thought, wow, what a wonderful curation. You had 3 artists on show there, Rebecca Appleby, Richard Perry and Derek Wilson. And these are all makers working in different mediums. So you had ceramics, you have stonemasonry, but there was a real command of sort of taking architectural forms and shapes and seeing them in different materials. What a showcase to kick off with. Also, Collect Open. This is sort of a section of the fair that's installation for newer makers, I guess introducing them to collectors who might not have seen them before. And Darren Appiagi, a woodworker based in Deptford, I'm definitely going to schedule in a studio visit. So you can expect a report from his studio coming up soon. A wonderful exhibition of vessels carved from wood. So I'm not going to say much more because I know
you're going to be there soon. I mean, I know you did pick up an interview at the fair. So tell us who we're going to hear from the floor of Collect.
Yes, so we're going to hear now from Jeannie Lee. She's the founding gallerist at Siet Gallery, and again based in Seoul normally. So again, an opportunity to speak with someone that we wouldn't get normally. They represent contemporary jewellery and crafts, and I was really drawn to this particular space because I picked up this small vessel that looked to be glass, and the maker was there and said, yeah, it's made of denim. And I had to double check and have a look at the material composition, and yeah, there it was, denim and resin, but used in such a way that it was unbelievable. So again, that's what struck me, and you'll hear more about that now.
My goal was actually to really represents Korean artists in different countries and in the international field. And I've noticed that Collect has been one of the most prominent craft fairs in the world, so I wanted to try, and it's been going really well. And people have been loving all the works that I've been showing, so that's why I've been coming back since 2023. The works that I represent are a great mix, but I always try to include some art jewelry, so contemporary jewelry, which are, you could think it as the wearable art pieces. But I also show some other craft works, for example, like vessel works or objet pieces, or also some pieces that can be hung on the wall. So it's a great mix.
Something that struck me whilst passing through, and the reason why I actually wanted to stop and have a chat with you, it's just the use of material. A lot of the pieces here, you kind of look at them, and it's only when you read the material description you realise it's made from denim or it's made from leather, which on initial glance you might not expect. Tell me about the choice to showcase works that maybe are a little bit more unusual, that aren't the very traditional way of creating.
While my visits in Collect, I've noticed that a lot of the visitors were very much interested in seeing something that they haven't seen before. And for me, I've seen that a lot of Korean artists were exploring their artistic styles with different materials and really experimenting with materials that has never been used in the art field, or materials that are quite traditional, but artists, they come up with some other innovative method of their own to create their unique style. Especially for this year, I really try to choose artists who are in this sense of using material in a different way. As you've mentioned, we have an artist who's using denim to make his vessel works, and we have an artist using leather that actually completely, in the end, the outcome looks like something like wood or stone. Then I have two artists who are using paper as their main material. Or I have artists who uses wood, but his technique of using torch on the wood is painting on the wood. So really keeping the essence of material, but the outcome always looks as if it's something completely different. We have an artist whose name is Chung-Hoo Kim, and she's making jewelry works, and we're showing 3 necklace pieces. The material that she used here is hanji, which is a very traditional Korean paper, and it's known to be one of the most durable paper in the world. And how she made these necklaces is, it's actually not just hanji, but it's a lacquered hanji with Korean ochil, which is the all-natural lacquer coming from a sap of a certain tree, so it's all natural. And this lacquer has also been in Korea since ancient time. And it's been used on wood, on metal, and all sorts of materials to really protect the material. But she's been incorporating that ochil as like a color paint. And she didn't paint the lacquer on the paper herself, but it was actually someone else, the ochil artisan, who had this paper as the base material. And the ochil was just naturally seeping into the paper, and he was going to throw it away. But she was visiting his studio, and she saw this paper that was just giving this natural look, and she was mesmerized. So she was like, I'm going to take all the paper that you have. So she was able to get what was going to be thrown away and use them and cut them into circles and paste them and reshape them into an art piece. So it's upcycled, but also using a very two traditional materials into Korea, but she's made them into contemporary jewelry.
So that was Jeannie Lee, founding gallerist at Siat Gallery. But it's over to you, Nick. We've got the March issue on the shelves. What have you brought to the show?
Yes, so the first week of March, the newest edition of Monocle magazine is on newsstands. And we, as part of it, we did this quite significant industry report on rug making. So we visited rug makers in Japan, in Sweden, and also in India. And I want to focus on the Indian component of this. So we visited Jaipur rugs, which are based in northern India. They were established in 1978 by Nan Kishore Chaudhry and one of India's largest handmade carpet manufacturers. They also create Just outstanding, just beautiful contemporary works, really unexpected pieces that can bring life and vitality into a home. But the reason we dived into them was because they've recently acquired another amazing Indian rug maker, Shyam Ahuja, who were established in 1963. And they've become really renowned for their manufacturing of the durry, which is a flat woven floor covering from northern India. So much so that they sort of had their heyday in the 70s and 80s and really became quite renowned, particularly in the US, with their rugs owned by people like Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, Anna Wintour, Gianni Versace. All these kind of famous people had Shyam Ahuja rugs in their home.
Okay, so we've got some famous fans there, but why did this story pique your interest?
For me, there's some interest in that acquisition, in how one established brand is going to work with another established brand, not take them over. They're going to keep operating them completely distinctly. I guess I was interested in that complementary nature of it. But this is also an important report. We're talking about craft earlier in the show with Collect, but in a country that has become a manufacturing hub for international labels, rug brands from all over the globe, whilst they might have Australia on their label, they're often made in India. It's good to see makers working for a company that's also based in the same community. And I think that's really, really important for me, because there's an element of giving back that's built into Jaipur Rugs' and Shyam Ahuja's operation, in terms of they're hiring local people, they're training new recruits in carpet making, they're helping second, third generation artisans improve their skills. This is all partly through their Jaipur Rugs Foundation, but it's something they've done since day dot. They're kind of the multiple layers that make this really special. So we've got a little snippet of the conversation from the writer Prasad Ramamurthy, who worked on the piece for Monocle magazine. He was in conversation with Yogesh Chaudhry, the second generation director of Jaipur Rugs.
Shyam Ahuja was one of the first luxury home interiors brand that has ever existed. I think there's a huge opportunity to bring it back to where it was. So I think that's the intent. There's been very amazing learnings also for us, which I didn't expect. There's a lot of learning on how they operate. It's a very different ethos. It's a very different style than how Jaipur Rugs kind of works. Jaipur Rugs is a business where you're welcoming customers to come in, right? But Shyam Ahuja was like, hey, I'm this designer and my product is the best. You want to buy it or don't buy, right? So it's a very different attitude towards selling. Having these two ships running, and the reason we said, okay, we don't want to merge them is because the philosophies, the ideology was so different. There's a lot of common thread behind the craftsmanship, behind the obsession with quality, behind making sure it's global. There's a lot of commonality, but the personality of the businesses are very different. And that's why when we said, okay, this has to be independent, this has to be separate from Jaipur Rugs, there might be some overlaps, but for the most bit, they also target sort of a different audience.
We're sitting in this HQ of yours. All around us are these amazing rugs. Some of them which draw on like older references, Persian references, some which are so much more modern. And then there is that entire art range of yours. It does seem like it's already speaking a sort of a global language, looking back while looking forward. How do you see doing that with a brand like Shyam Ahuja? It's a brand that has its roots in a lineage in a sort of a different time of aesthetics.
The amazing part that we're discovering more and more is that the brand, most of the products that they're making are completely timeless. Today, when you go to people's home and you see a Shyam Ahuja Dari, you wouldn't be able to tell if it was made 40 years ago or if it's made today. If you look at the ads that this guy did in the 80s, you could put it in the magazine today and it'll be like the coolest ad that exists, right? I think that timelessness of the brand is incredible. Shyam Ahuja was really focusing on products that would, even 100 years later, if you were to make the same thing, it'll still fit in with what the world trend is at that point.
In terms of the design language or the creativity, and since Jaipur Rugs now has access to the entire archival material at Shyam Ahuja, do you see borrowing any of that creativity, those sort of design references, those codes, and incorporating it into Jaipur Rugs?
I don't really see that there's going to be much overlap in terms of the visual language, at least, because like Shyam Ahuja has a very strong carpet design language, the fabrics, the color language is very strong. Most people would look at a Dari and immediately say Shyam Ahuja. And their visual communication was also very timeless. A lot of the times when they were doing their ads, the focus was really not on the product, right? It was on that art. It was on creating something super cool. I remember conversations where these guys were saying that Shyam Ahuja wanted to say that I'll put an ad but I'll not write my name. And the right people will know who this is. That's how strong the design language was, right? To be able to recognize a brand on a piece of paper where there's no mention of the brand. So that I think is very powerful.
With Jaipur rugs, you guys have grown, I think, quite phenomenally, especially in the past 5 to 7 years. You're at art fairs, you're doing collaborations with amazing names, and of course, the number of all the art rugs, especially, the kind of conversations that have come up around them. How do you see your own product line evolving in the next few years?
Over the years, I think what I've realized is that a lot of people look up to us as doing the very core, basic, very nice, great, amazing product. But at the same time, we want to keep doing these little cool things here and there, which sort of push some of the other boundary. So a lot of these creative people have become like centers of innovation for us. I think at Jaipur Rugs, what we really want to do is keep creating cool things, but also get like really cool people from all over the world to come. And this becomes like this experiment, innovation, art factory, which is constantly doing new things. Some might look amazing and some might be like, oh, you can probably pass, but at least we're experimenting. We're trying to innovate. You're showcasing different things where we're always trying to make something cool new, right? And carpet is the most boring product. So we said, how do we make it cool and make carpet reflect our client's personality? A lot of our clients are young, very vibrant, and with the home design, they want to communicate that language. We're trying to do the same to follow some of our clientele and see if we can make product that as soon as they see, they're like, oh my God, this is who I am. And this is what I would like in my home because that it represents my personality.
Your guest, Chaudhry, there. Maylee, anything that jumped out at you from that discussion? I'm just going to put you on the spot here.
For me, it's that distinction of understanding why the brand that they've acquired had such a brilliant archive and not trying to absorb that into Jaipur Rugs, but actually understand this is a standalone brand. Let's leave that alone. Let's run with that rather than sort of try and pivot and do something completely differently. I think that's something that a lot of other brands could learn from.
Yeah, it's admiring the confidence of an archive and recognising that an archive can stand on its own and still feel contemporary and relevant today. Speaking of feeling contemporary and relevant today and of archives, how's this for a segue? We're going to look at the work of Christopher Dresser, a key figure in British industrial design in the 19th century. I know nothing about him, but you seem to know something about him.
It's a name which a lot of people might not recognise listening to this programme, which was kind of why I wanted to feature him. So he collaborated with lots of manufacturers across a range of materials, which we're going to hear about in a moment. Now, some of his work is currently on exhibition at London Auction House Bonhams and will be later on auction. So it felt like a great time to speak with Otto Billstrom. He's the head of modern decorative arts and design at Bonhams, who told me a little bit more about Dresser and the impact that he had on industrial design.
Christopher Dresser, I think that the word that springs to mind first and foremost is industrial design, bearing in mind that we're talking about the mid-19th century here, so we're talking immediate post-industrial revolution. We're talking about a new England. You've got a new socio-economic landscape emerging, a new socio-political class emerging, which Dresser is part of, the emerging middle class, and I think that was a particular emphasis of his throughout his career, designing wares for the middle class. Christopher Dresser is born in 1834. You start to see mechanized production enter as a concept in society, but it's quite apparent that a lot of this is subpar goods. The government sets out an initiative, essentially. We need to form design schools so we can cater for design for the future, and Dresser enters into this at quite a young age. He's 12 when he goes to the Government School of Design, which is at Somerset House at the time. Dresser was born in Glasgow, so he immediately transfers down to London at quite a young age. And it's in this setting that he actually study botany, which is an emerging science. That correlation between science and design is something that is very prevalent in Dresser. And a lot of it stems back to this almost natural order of things, and I think that's what he distills into a lot of his work. Dresser had a very firm philosophy of ornamentation and aesthetics, and he was considering himself an aesthete or an ornamentalist. Ornament is best expressed through the reduction of any subject matter into its very most basic forms. Take a flower, for example. You talk about stylization. The stem is only a straight line. You have very basic petals. It's not the sort of lavish, expressionist, vivid colours. It's very much line drawings, and it goes back to the very industrial root. You're looking at blueprints, for example. It's very much the blueprint of nature, if you will, that he seeks to look at. That is very vividly implied from the get-go. If you look at his designs for Minton, for example, it's very much as if someone did a blueprint of a flower onto a vase or a tile, and that then develops throughout his career. The more he exposes himself to a wider variety of subject matter. And it's worth taking into account at this point the zeitgeist of the era. You have the British Empire spanning far and wide. You have an influx of objects coming from left, right and centre of the world, and these manifest into museums. The Maori of the Pacific region, or pre-Columbian artefacts, Egypt, Mesopotamia, it's all being made available in these institutions. And Dresser is a very big proponent in going to the South Kensington Museum, today V&A, to really absorb these new in inverted commas, but unfamiliar shapes that can then be broken down into these blueprint components. Looking at Dresser's body of work, you'll see that he draws on everything from Egyptian to Japanese to the Mesopotamian to the pre-Columbian. It's all there, which makes collecting Dresser such a fantastic hobby for those that do, because it's so easy to integrate into almost any scheme that you have or any other category of object that you collect.
There's a lot of work influenced by a particular trip he took in, I believe it's 1876 to Japan, but are there any particular objects or examples which you think exemplify this influence?
The most obvious one that jumps to mind, if you want to talk about the Japanese aesthetic, is the sake bottle that he designs for Linthorpe in around 1876, which is modelled as a Buddhist monk. The body of the vase is you can almost feel how it's been impressed and modelled like a robe, and then it has this really archaic terracotta head model as a stopper. So that is a very strong, direct influence. When looking at the vast body of work that Dresser produced, it's worth reading between the lines a little bit. Dresser was one of the first big proponents of Japanese art. It's worth looking at the historical context of Japan, because Japan had, for almost 200 years, had been completely sealed off to the West. So trade with the West ceases in the mid-17th century, but to open its borders again around 1854. And Dresser is sent as an envoy of the British Empire to Japan in 1876 with the explicit purpose to study the architecture, the objects, the culture, the makers, and all of this gets distilled into the work Japan, its architecture, art and manufacturers, which was by and large the principal account of Japanese aesthetics in the West for a long time following his return. Dresser sees a correlation with his own almost philosophy of design, those sort of blueprints, the repeating motifs. And you see that a lot in his works coming back from Japan is a vast array of toast racks, for example, that emerge. It has a very basic designs, but they are geometric motifs that are repetitive, as one would see on a piece of fabric or in a woodblock print. We call it Japanism in the aesthetical term, the desire for that Japanese taste and the influence that it exerts on British interiors from, say, Dresser's return 1876 way up until the turn of the century. Dresser had his work cut out for him. I mean, he was hired as artistic director for a lot of major manufacturers at the time. Silverware and metalware makers like Hooken and Heath or James Dixon and Sons. He set up the Linthorpe potteries through which he did the aforementioned sake bottle. He worked on fabric designs, textile designs, every single media to really express this philosophy.
And as you say, it's a number of different mediums in there. Is he most well known for working in one, or is it because of that range of expertise and collaborations?
It's the polymath approach in a way. And what is also important to underline here that these are all medium that can be mass produced. It's industrial production that we're talking about. Steel and glass. He's a contemporary to William Morris, who is the diametric opposite, where you have the artist maker, so you have wood and fabric, which is all very literal for the artist maker. It's almost like a sort of Vasari readapted idea of the maker sort of channeling his mind into the object, whereas Dresser is quite cold and calculated, some might say, in the sense that these can be made without the artist's hand touching it, but they still have a high artistic and aesthetic merit.
Where can we see the legacy or the influence from Dresser's work later on?
It's a funny thing. Dresser upon his death almost gets forgotten about completely, which to me suggests that the world wasn't really ready for Dresser at the time that he emerged. Instead, you have to look at Central Europe, where the immediate legacy is mostly at the Wiener Secession, for example, with two prominent names being Joseph Hoffmann and Koloman Moser, who both travelled to London in 1903. There's vast records of this, where they would have encountered certainly the emerging makers of the time, such as Charles Robert Ashby and Charles Rennie Mackintosh, but Dresser would certainly have been still exerting his influence. Looking at their consecutive work, you see the same veneration and almost reversion to that naturalistic blueprint that Dresser pioneered, and that is only snowballed in when you move into the 1920s and you look at something like Bauhaus, for example, and Marianne Brandt. She would have likely been unaware of Dresser as a figure or as a maker, but the trajectory is definitely there when looking at the materials used, the shapes used, and that's why Dresser in many ways often gets mistaxonomized, for the use of a botanical term, as Art Deco, whereas he was 60 years prior when he was in his prime. But it's in that period that the interest for Dresser starts to re-emerge. You look at the latter half of the 1930s, the renowned art historian Nicholas Pevsner publishes the first body of work that mentions Dresser as a figure of driving aesthetics in the mid to late Victorian period. In 1950, the first proper retrospective of Dresser's work is held. It's organised by Nicholas Pevsner in conjunction with Dresser's descendants. It's really there where the modern interest in Christopher Dresser takes form. We are less than 100 years away from present day, and it was for a long time a very academic subject, hence why it might not be that familiar to the vast majority of design enthusiasts today. It has almost a timelessness to it, and I think that is very much intentional on Dresser's path, that it should be timeless, not dictated by fashion, not dictated by trends that are come and going, but rather to be that sort of ethereal, ever-present. And I think that's what makes it so easy for younger generations certainly to relate to it. There's a minimalist aspect to it that they can find very relatable. On the opposite hand, it's also a very maximalist side, with bold colours and quirky shapes that are very evocative of, say, Memphis. There's a red thread that goes through it all, really. There's so many points where it connects that it merges seamlessly into any collection that is introduced to.
From the range that's going to be on auction, what's maybe one item that you just really enjoy talking about or sharing with prospective buyers?
Oh, there's so many fantastic pieces in this collection, like from his glass production, which he did towards the end of his life, towards some extraordinarily rare pieces of metalwork that were only made in a few examples, and few are surviving to this day. But my favourite, I would say, is a small cache pot or jardinière, which has a screen print design on the outside. It's such a pure example of Dresser's own philosophy. So it's a screen printed design of flowers, but it's got that sort of blueprint aesthetic that he pioneered. When looking at it, it really helps me understand his philosophy, this breaking down of decorative material into its most basic geometric components, the truth that it unveils about an object, harkening back to his core philosophy of truth, beauty and power. That was his working motto.
That was Otto Billström, and the Julius Hummel collection of Christopher Dresser, designed before its time, is on show until the 6th of March online and at Bonhams in Knightsbridge. And then on auction, take a look online if perhaps you have a couple of grand to burn.
I mean, also I just feel it completely appropriate for a man called Dresser to work in furniture and product design. I think that's remarkable and wonderful. I'm a little bit jealous of his name. But that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans. Thank you, Maylee Evans.
You're very welcome.
I'm Nick Manise, and you can reach me on nm@monocle.com. Thanks for listening.